The little girl said, "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." The vampire king followed her into the snow. The blizzard screamed through the capital streets of Frostfall like the wail of restless spirits. It was the darkest hour before dawn, when cold becomes a living thing that bites and claws. Snow fell in furious sheets, blinding and relentless. Every shutter in the lower quarter remained barred tight. The cobblestone streets lay buried beneath drifts that rose like frozen waves. Heavy storm clouds, black as mourning cloth, pressed down upon the kingdom, smothering even the glow of enchanted street lamps. Ella Morgan, only 5 years old, wandered alone through the snow. She wore a threadbare crimson dress beneath a coat 2 sizes too large, patched at the elbows and torn at the hem. Her small boots, once brown leather, were soaked through to her stockings. Her feet trembled with every step, numb and aching. Honey-colored hair, tied in a lopsided braid, clung to her frostbitten cheeks. Her lips had gone pale as ash. Her tiny hands, red and swollen, clutched the straps of a faded green backpack against her chest. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. She had been walking since the first gray light touched the horizon, searching, hoping, praying. Her mother, Scarlett Morgan, had not come home the night before. It had never happened before. Scarlett worked late at the apothecary in the lower quarter, grinding herbs and mixing remedies by candlelight. No matter how exhausted, she always returned before Ella woke to press a kiss to her forehead and whisper, "I'm home, little love." Always, but not today. Ella had gone to the apothecary first, slipping through the empty streets in the pre-dawn dark. The door had been locked. The windows are dark. Then she checked the marketplace, the Healer's Guild Hall, even the frozen fountain where her mother sometimes stopped to rest. Nothing. Just silence, snow, and wind that made her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. Her teeth chattered as she whispered to herself, voice cracking. Mama always comes home. She always does. She remembered something her mother once said during one of their bedtime stories, when Ella had asked about the dark manor on the hill. If you're ever truly frightened, ever truly alone, go to the tall black gates near the big house. The man there is kind, even if others fear him. Ella had never been there. She had only seen it from a distance, its lamplight warm and steady through winter storms. Now, with nowhere else to turn, she lifted her gaze toward the hill. The climb was brutal. Her legs burned. Her breath came in short, painful gasps that turned to mist before her face. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. Snow filled her boots. Her fingers went numb around the backpack straps. But she climbed, step by agonizing step. Black Spire Manor emerged through the storm like something from a fever dream, towering walls of frost-blackened stone, wrought iron gates taller than 3 men, and ancient pines that groaned beneath the weight of ice. Golden light glowed behind arched windows, impossibly warm against the savage cold. Ella reached the gate, unsure of what to do next. She looked up at the intricate metalwork, at the stone gargoyles perched above, their eyes seeming to track her movement. Did anyone know she was here? Could anyone even see her through the storm? A gust of wind struck her like a fist. She staggered sideways, catching herself against the iron bars. Her breath came out in ragged clouds. Her legs trembled violently. She couldn't think anymore. Couldn't plan. Couldn't move. She sank down into the snow, curling into herself, arms wrapped around her knees, head tucked low. A sudden burst of motion overhead, a crow exploding from a snow-laden branch with a harsh cry. Ella flinched, tried to stand, but her legs betrayed her. She collapsed forward into the snow. Then, click. The gate opened with a whisper of ancient magic. A figure stepped through. Lord Cale Ardentes, the vampire king, stood at the threshold of his domain. He was tall and pale as carved marble, silver hair falling past his shoulders and whipping in the wind. He wore black robes embroidered with silver thorns, and a circlet of dark iron rested upon his brow like a crown of frost. His eyes, crimson as fresh blood, glowed faintly in the pre-dawn darkness. He had been preparing to meet with his council, his mind occupied with matters of politics and old grudges, when he heard it. A heartbeat.
Small.
Fragile.
Fading.
He turned his gaze downward and froze. A tiny child, crumpling into the snow at his gates. Cale dropped the sealed letter in his hand.
No.
He moved with inhuman speed, crossing the distance in a heartbeat, falling to one knee beside her. His cloak billowed around them both as he reached for her, catching her before she could fall completely. "Child," he called, his voice low and urgent. "Can you hear me?" Ella stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open just enough to see him, a pale face framed by silver, eyes glowing red in the storm. She should have been afraid. But she wasn't. Her small hand reached up, grasping weakly at his embroidered collar, and she whispered, barely audible over the wind, "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night. I'm looking for her." Then her hand went limp. Her eyes closed. Her head fell against his chest. Cale's heart, silent for centuries, gave a sudden, sharp twist. He swept her into his arms, cradling her against him as his cloak wrapped around her like a shield. She was impossibly light, impossibly cold. He turned and strode back through the gates, his voice ringing out with a command that echoed through the manor halls. "Summon the healer. Light the grand hearth, now." Inside, warmth radiated from the ancient fireplace in the great hall. He laid her gently upon a velvet divan near the flames, his hands surprisingly careful as he adjusted the cushions beneath her head. Her coat slipped open. Her small backpack slid from her shoulder, landing beside her with a soft thud. Cale crouched and opened it, searching for something, anything, that might tell him who she was. Inside, he found a pair of torn mittens, a wooden toy horse, and a folded piece of parchment. He unfolded it carefully. A child's crayon drawing. A woman with golden hair, holding hands with a little girl beneath a smiling sun. Cale stared at it, something cold and unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He looked back at the child, her face still pale, her breath shallow. He whispered, more to himself than to anyone, "Where is your mother, little one? And why were you wandering alone in a storm that could kill even the living dead?"
He didn't know it yet.
But that morning, when a fragile child collapsed at his gates and whispered a plea that pierced centuries of ice, the Vampire King's fate had shifted. And nothing in Frostfall would ever be the same. That was the first thing Ella felt when she opened her eyes. A soft golden glow flickered nearby, firelight. The scent of pine and ancient wood filled the room, unfamiliar but strangely comforting. She blinked, her vision adjusting to towering bookshelves, tapestries woven with silver thread, a ceiling vaulted like a cathedral, and a hearth large enough to stand in, flames dancing within. A thick blanket had been pulled up to her chin, and sitting beside her, in a high-backed chair, was him, the man from the gate, the one with silver hair and glowing red eyes. He wasn't smiling, his expression was distant, unreadable, but the sharpness she'd glimpsed through the storm had softened. In its place was something quieter, watchful, almost concerned. He held a steaming cup in his hands. "You're awake," he said, his voice gentler than she expected. "That's good. You gave us quite a scare." Ella shifted slightly, her small hands clutching the blanket.
She didn't speak.
The man leaned forward, offering her the cup. "It's honeyed tea, warm, but not too hot." She took it carefully, her fingers still trembling. "I am Lord Cale Ardentis," he said quietly, his crimson gaze meeting hers. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your mother's name?" Ella hesitated. Then she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Her name is Scarlett Morgan." Cale went utterly still. His eyes widened, just for a moment, before his expression hardened into something sharp and focused. Scarlett Morgan. The name struck him like a blade, through memory. Years ago. A wound. A stranger who had tended to him in secret, asking no questions, expecting no reward. He had thought she didn't know who he truly was. But now. "Do you know where she works?" he asked, his tone carefully controlled. Ella's gaze dropped to her lap. At the apothecary. In the lower quarter. She goes when it's dark, and she always comes home. Her voice broke on the last word. Kale stood abruptly, crossing to the window. Beyond the frost-etched glass, the storm still raged. But now it feels different. Heavier. More dangerous. Scarlett Morgan has a daughter. And she didn't come home. He turned back to Ella, whose wide, frightened eyes watched him as if he were her last hope. Something ancient stirred within him, something he had buried beneath centuries of cold rule and calculated indifference. Kale crossed the room and knelt before her, meeting her gaze. "I will find your mother," he said. And for the first time in centuries, he meant every word. Ella's fingers trembled around the warm cup as steam curled into the air between them. Lord Kale Ardendiz remained kneeling before her, his crimson eyes searching her face with an intensity that should have frightened her. But there was something in his expression, beneath the sharpness, beneath the ancient weight of his gaze, that felt almost gentle. "Drink," he said quietly. "You're still cold." She obeyed, taking small sips of the honeyed tea. Warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the bone-deep chill that had settled into her during the long walk through the storm. For the first time since waking, Ella looked around. The chamber was vast, far larger than any room she'd ever seen. Gothic arches soared overhead, their peaks lost in shadow despite the glow of enchanted sconces that lined the stone walls. The light they cast was soft and golden, flickering without flame, as if the magic itself were alive. Tapestries hung between the arches, ancient and intricate, depicting battles fought beneath blood-red moons and frozen forests where silver-eyed wolves prowled. The air smelled of old parchment, cedar wood, and something else, something faintly metallic and otherworldly that made the hair on her arms stand on end. This was not a place meant for children. It was a place built for power, for eternity. And yet, the fire roaring in the hearth before her was warm, the blanket soft, the tea sweet. Kale rose slowly, moving to a carved sideboard where a crystal decanter sat beside several goblets. He poured something dark into one of them, wine, perhaps, or something less innocent, and took a slow drink, his back to her. "Scarlett Morgan," he murmured, as if testing the name on his tongue. "I knew a woman by that name once. Years ago." Ella looked up sharply. "You know my mama?" Kale turned, his expression distant, his gaze fixed on something beyond the walls of the manor, on memory itself. "It was a long time ago," he said quietly. "I had been injured, betrayed by someone I trusted. I retreated to the lower quarter to avoid my enemies, and I collapsed in an alley."
His jaw tightened.
"A healer found me. She brought me to her shop, tended my wounds, asked no questions. I thought she didn't know who I was. I thought I had hidden it well enough." He set the goblet down with a soft clink. "But she knew. She must have.
And still, she helped me."
Ella's heart swelled. "That sounds like Mama. She always helps people, even when they're scared of her." Kale's gaze sharpened, focusing on her once more. "Tell me everything. When did you last see her?" Ella swallowed hard, her hands tightening around the cup. "Yesterday morning. She said she had to go to the apothecary before dark. She said she'd be home before I woke up. She always is." Her voice cracked. "But she didn't come home. I waited. I looked everywhere. The apothecary was locked. I didn't know what to do." Kale moved closer, crouching again, so they were eye level. His voice was calm, steady, a lifeline in the storm of her fear. "Did anything unusual happen before she left? Did she seem worried? Frightened?" Ella shook her head.
"No."
She smiled. She said everything would be fine. Kale studied her for a long moment, and then something flickered across his features. His eyes narrowed. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. "Strange," he murmured. "What?" He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near her shoulder, but not quite touching. "There's magic around you. Faint, but distinct. Protective. Old." His crimson eyes gleamed. "Winter blood." Ella blinked. "Winter blood. A rare lineage," Kale said, his voice quiet but edged with urgency. once wielded by the ancient guardians of Frostfall. I thought the bloodline had died out centuries ago. He straightened, his expression darkening. If your mother carries that magic, even dormant, then her disappearance is no accident. Before Ella could respond, the heavy doors to the chamber burst open. 3 figures swept inside, tall, pale, draped in dark robes embroidered with silver sigils. Vampires. Kale's court. Their eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, their expressions cold and sharp. The one in the center, a woman with raven-black hair and a thin mouth, spoke first. "My lord, we must speak with you." Immediately. Kale didn't move. "I'm occupied." The woman's gaze slid to Ella, her lip curling slightly.
Yes.
"We noticed. A human child in Black Spire Manor. Forgive us, my lord, but we must question the wisdom of—" "You question nothing," Kale interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "You advise, and I decide." The woman hesitated, then bowed her head. "Of course, but the court is concerned. Rumors are spreading. Blood mages have been sighted near the snowfields. The people grow restless. And now you shelter a mortal child. This child's mother has been taken," Kale said coldly, "and I intend to find her." The advisors exchanged glances. Another stepped forward, a man with a sharp jawline and calculating eyes. "With respect, my lord, why? What is one mortal woman to you? To Frostfall?" Kale's eyes blazed. "That is not your concern." "But it is," the man pressed. "If you abandon your duties for—" "Enough." The word was a blade. The advisors fell silent, their expressions stiff. Kale moved to stand between them and Ella, his presence a wall of cold authority. "I have made my decision. The child remains under my protection, and I will find Scarlet Morgan before nightfall. If any of you take issue with this, you are welcome to leave my court. Permanently." No one moved. Kale gestured sharply toward the door. "Go.
Prepare a search party.
I want every trace of blood magic in the lower quarter investigated. And send word to the guild masters. No one leaves the city without my knowledge." The advisors bowed stiffly and swept from the room, their robes trailing behind them like shadows. The doors closed with a resounding thud. Silence settled over the chamber. Kale exhaled slowly, his shoulders loosening just slightly. He turned back to Ella, who watched him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Are they angry?" she whispered. "They're always angry," Kale said, a faint trace of wry humor touching his voice. "Immortals don't handle change well." He crossed to her again, lowering himself to one knee so they were face to face. "Ella," he said quietly, "I don't know what's happened to your mother yet, but I know this. Whoever took her made a grave mistake, and I will not let them keep her." Ella's lip trembled. "Promise." Kale held her gaze, and for the first time in centuries, longer than he could remember, something within him shifted. Something he had thought was lost forever. Compassion, purpose, determination. "I promise," he said. And he meant it. The storm had not relented. If anything, it had grown fiercer, as though the kingdom itself sensed the darkness stirring within its borders. Snow fell in blinding torrents, and the wind howled through the narrow streets of the lower quarter like a living thing with teeth. But Kale Arden moved through it, as if the storm dared not touch him. His long black cloak billowed behind him, enchanted fabric repelling the worst of the cold. Ella walked beside him, or rather, was carried within the shelter of that cloak, wrapped against his side, shielded from the biting wind. He had tried to leave her at the manor. She had refused. "I have to help find Mama," she'd said, her small voice trembling but resolute. "Please." And something in her eyes, something fierce and desperate, had made him relent. Now, as they descended the winding cobblestone streets toward the lower quarter, Kale kept one hand on her shoulder, steadying her against the gusts that threatened to knock her sideways. His other hand rested on the hilt of a blade concealed beneath his cloak. "Stay close," he murmured. "And if I tell you to run, you run. Do you understand?" Ella nodded, her small fingers gripping the fabric of his cloak. They moved through streets that should have been bustling even in a storm, market stalls, taverns, the clamor of daily life. But the lower quarter was silent, shutters barred, doors locked. Only the wind and the distant creak of swinging signs broke the eerie quiet. There, Ella whispered, pointing toward a narrow building wedged between a baker's shop and a blacksmith's forge. That's Mama's apothecary. Cale's gaze sharpened. The building was small, its wooden sign, painted with a mortar and pestle, swinging violently in the wind. But even from a distance, he could see that something was wrong. The windows were cracked, spiderwebbed with fractures that radiated outward as if something had struck them from within. The door hung ajar, one hinge broken, and along the stone frame, burned into the wood and mortar, were symbols. Sigils. Cale's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me." He approached slowly, every sense heightened. The scent of scorched herbs and something darker, sulfur, blood, and burned magic, hung in the air. He pushed the door open with one hand, and it creaked inward, revealing the devastation within. The apothecary had been torn apart. Shelves were shattered, their contents strewn across the floor, jars of dried flowers, vials of tinctures, bundles of herbs now trampled and ruined. The counter was split down the middle, as if cleaved by an invisible blade. And everywhere were the sigils, burned into the walls, scorched into the floorboards, glowing faintly with residual magic that made Cale's skin prickle. "Blood magic," he said quietly, his voice cold. "Ritual marks. Someone performed a summoning here, or an extraction." Ella stepped inside, her eyes wide with horror. "Mama." She moved forward, her boots crunching over broken glass, and Cale didn't stop her. He watched as she searched, desperately, frantically, through the wreckage, looking for something, anything, that might tell her where her mother had gone. And then she froze. "Mama's scarf," she whispered. Cale turned. Ella had dropped to her knees near the overturned counter, her small hands reaching for a length of fabric, deep green wool, embroidered with golden thread along the edges. It lay crumpled on the floor, half buried beneath shattered pottery. She pulled it free, clutching it to her chest, and her entire body began to shake. "She was here," Ella choked out. "She was here, and they..." Her voice broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and fast, and she buried her face in the scarf, her small frame racked with sobs. Cale stood frozen for a moment, unsure. Comfort was not something he had offered in centuries. It was not something he remembered how to offer. But then he moved. He crossed to her, lowering himself to one knee, and placed a hand, carefully, gently, on her shoulder. "Ella," he said quietly, "look at me." She lifted her tear-streaked face, her breath hitching. "Your mother is strong," Cale said, his voice steady. "Stronger than you know. And she's still alive. I would sense it if she were not." "How do you know?" Ella whispered. "Because the magic here is not the magic of death. It's the magic of containment, of capture." His crimson eyes held hers. "They took her, which means they need her. And as long as they need her, she lives." Ella's breathing slowed, just slightly. "You promise?" "I promise." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, and clutched the scarf tighter. Cale rose, his gaze sweeping the room once more. And then he saw them. Footprints. Not in snow, not in mud, but burned into the wooden floor as if something had walked through fire and left its mark behind. The prints were too large to be human, too narrow to be a vampire, and they glowed faintly with the same sickly green light as the sigils. "Constructs," Cale murmured. "Magically crafted servants." He followed the trail with his eyes. The footprints led from the center of the room, where Scarlet must have been standing, toward the back door. And beyond that, "The snowfields," he said grimly. Ella stood, still clutching the scarf. "Are we going there?" "I am," Cale said, turning to her. "You."
No.
Her voice was small but fierce. "You can't leave me behind. What if they come back? What if?" "Ella, please." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I can't lose you two. I can't be alone again." Cale stared at her, this tiny, fragile child who had somehow pulled him from the safety of his manor into the heart of danger, who had somehow made him care. He exhaled slowly. If you come with me, you do exactly as I say. No exceptions. Ella nodded quickly. I promise. Before Cale could respond, the door burst open behind them. A vampire in court livery stumbled inside, his face pale even by their standards, his breath coming in sharp gasps. My lord, he rasped. Urgent news from the northern outpost. Cale turned sharply. Speak. Blood mage sightings, the messenger said, his voice strained. Across Frostfall, near the snowfields, the winter cathedral ruins, even within the capital walls. They're not hiding anymore, my lord. They're preparing for something. Cale's expression darkened, his crimson eyes blazing. How many? Dozens. Maybe more. Silence. Then Cale turned back to the ruined apothecary, his gaze tracing the scorched sigils, the shattered shelves, the faint glow of the construct's footprints leading into the storm. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried the weight of centuries. Scarlet was taken. And whoever did this dares to awaken an enemy older than Frostfall itself. Ella looked up at him, fear and hope warring in her eyes. What enemy? Cale's jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder and guided her toward the door.
Come, he said.
We're running out of time. The High Council chamber was a place built for judgment. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Pillars of black stone rose like ancient sentinels, carved with the names of every vampire lord who had ruled Frostfall since the kingdom's founding. At the center of the room stood a circular table of dark wood, its surface etched with silver runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Cale Ardendes stood at the head of that table, his hands braced against its edge, his crimson eyes blazing as he addressed the council that had served him for centuries. Blood mages, he said, his voice sharp and cold, operating openly within my kingdom. And not one of you thought to inform me until now. The council members, 7 vampires, each ancient and powerful in their own right, shifted uncomfortably in their high-backed chairs. Lady Morgan, the raven-haired woman who had interrupted him earlier, spoke first. Her voice was smooth, measured, but edged with steel. We did not wish to alarm you unnecessarily, my lord. Reports have been inconsistent. Unverified. Unverified, Cale repeated, his tone dangerous. I have just returned from the lower quarter. I have seen the sigils burned into the walls of an apothecary. I have seen the residue of summoning magic. I have seen footprints leading toward the snowfields. He straightened, his gaze sweeping across them. Tell me, Lady Morgan, does that sound unverified to you? She inclined her head, but her expression remained cold. It is not, my lord, and we are prepared to act. But we must discuss the matter of the human child. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Cale's jaw tightened. What about her? Lord Varen, the sharp-jawed advisor who had questioned him earlier, leaned forward. His voice was calm, almost condescending. With all due respect, my lord, you have brought a mortal child into Blackspire Manor. You have declared your intention to personally search for her missing mother. You are placing yourself, and by extension, this kingdom, at risk for the sake of one human woman. He paused. We must ask why. Because it is the right thing to do, Cale said flatly. Varen's lips thinned. The right thing is a luxury we cannot afford. Blood mages are gathering. Ancient enemies stir. And you would spend your time playing protector to a child? I would spend my time, Cale said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet, ensuring that darkness does not swallow this kingdom while you sit in your chairs and debate semantics. Silence. Another council member, a pale woman named Isolde, spoke softly. My lord, perhaps what Lord Varen means to say is that we are concerned. Concerned for your safety. Concerned that this child may be bait. A trap laid by the blood mages to lure you into danger. Cale's gaze snapped to her. Then they underestimated me. As, it seems, have some of you. Isolde bowed her head quickly. Of course not, my lord. We would never. Enough. Cale straightened, his hands leaving the table. Scarlet Morgan is not just any mortal. She carries winter blood in her veins, dormant, but present. And her daughter bears the same magic. He let that sink in. If the blood mages have taken her, it is because they intend to use that power. And if they succeed in whatever ritual they are preparing, none of us will be safe. Murmurs rippled through the council. Winter blood, Morrigan murmured. I thought the line extinct. So did I, Kale said grimly. But I was wrong. Varen leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. And what do you propose, my lord? A rescue mission into Blood Mage territory? A direct confrontation with forces we do not yet understand. Yes. The word hung in the air like a blade. Varen's expression hardened. That is reckless. That is necessary. My lord. This is not a debate, Kale said, his voice ringing with authority. This is a royal decree. I will find Scarlet Morgan. I will protect her daughter. And I will destroy whatever threat the Blood Mages pose to this kingdom. His crimson eyes blazed. Any who wish to oppose me may do so now. Openly. No one moved. No one spoke. Kale nodded slowly. Then we are finished here. Prepare scouts. I want every report of Blood Mage activity on my desk within the hour. The council rose, bowing stiffly, and filed out of the chamber in silence. All except Varen. He lingered near the doorway, his expression unreadable. My lord, he said quietly, I hope you know what you're doing. Kale met his gaze. I always do. Varen inclined his head and left. The heavy doors closed with a resonant thud. Kale stood alone in the chamber, his hands clenched into fists, his mind racing. He could feel it, the weight of centuries pressing down on him, the expectations, the responsibilities, the endless burden of ruling a kingdom that feared and needed him in equal measure. And beneath it all, something new, something fragile and fierce. A promise to a child. In another part of Blackspire Manor, Ella wandered. The corridors were vast and labyrinthine, lit by enchanted sconces that flickered as she passed. She kept her mother's scarf clutched in one hand, the fabric soft and familiar against her palm. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't sit still, couldn't stop thinking about her mother, alone somewhere in the dark. Lost, little one? Ella spun around. A vampire stood behind her, tall and slender, with auburn hair pulled back in a braid and eyes that glowed amber instead of crimson. She wore simple gray robes, and her expression was kind. I'm Alara, the woman said gently. I serve Lord Kale. You must be Ella. Ella nodded slowly. Alara smiled.
Come.
It's not safe to wander alone. Let me show you the library. It's warm there, and quieter than the rest of the manor. Ella hesitated, then followed. The library was enormous, shelves upon shelves of ancient books, scrolls, and tomes that reached toward the vaulted ceiling. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting golden light across the room. Alara gestured toward a cushioned chair near the fire.
Sit.
I'll bring you something warm to drink. Ella obeyed, sinking into the chair. Alara returned moments later with a steaming cup of cocoa and sat across from her. You're very brave, Alara said softly, coming all this way in the storm. Looking for your mother. Ella's throat tightened. I had to. I understand. Alara paused, studying her. Lord Kale told the council about your mother. About the winter blood. Ella looked up. What's winter blood? Alara's expression grew thoughtful. Long ago, before the vampires ruled Frostfall, there was an order of humans who wielded ancient magic. They were called the Winter Guard, protectors of the realm, keepers of balance. Their magic was tied to the land itself, to ice and snow and the old ways. She leaned forward. That magic passed through bloodlines. Your mother carries it, and so do you. Ella's eyes widened. I have magic? Dormant, Alara said gently.
Sleeping. But yes.
And if the blood mages know about it? She trailed off, her expression darkening. What do they want with Mama? Alara hesitated. Then she said quietly, they want to use her power to awaken something terrible. Something that should have stayed buried. Before Ella could respond, the library doors opened. Kale strode inside, his expression grim. He looked at Ella, then at Alara. Thank you, Alara. Leave us. Alara bowed and slipped from the room. Kale crossed to the fire, his gaze distant. The council is resistant, but they will obey. Ella stood, clutching her scarf. Are we still going to find Mama? Kale turned to her, and something softened in his expression.
Yes.
Tomorrow we leave for the snowfields. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. Kale nodded. Get some rest. You'll need your strength. Far below, in the shadowed depths of Blackspire Manor, Lord Varen stood alone in a locked chamber. He withdrew a small silver cage from his robes. Inside, a raven stirred, its eyes glowing faintly green, marked by blood magic. Varen tied a rolled parchment to its leg, his expression cold and calculating. The message was brief. The child is with the king. He released the raven through a narrow window. It launched into the storm, wings beating against the wind, carrying his betrayal into the night. Varen watched it disappear into the darkness. Then he smiled. Dawn never truly came to the snowfields. The sky remained a bruised gray, heavy with clouds that pressed down like a shroud. Snow fell endlessly here, not in gentle flakes but in thick, blinding sheets that swallowed sight and sound. The wind howled across the vast white expanse, a mournful keening that seemed to carry voices, whispers of the dead, or perhaps something worse. Kale moved through it like a shadow given form, his black cloak billowing behind him, his silver hair whipping in the gale. Ella walked beside him, wrapped once more in the shelter of his enchanted cloak, her small hand gripping the fabric tightly. They had been traveling for hours, following the faint trace of magical residue that clung to the air like ash. Kale could sense it, blood magic, old and twisted, a sickly green thread woven through the storm. It grew stronger with every step. How much farther? Ella asked, her voice small and muffled against the wind. Not far, Kale said, his crimson eyes scanning the horizon. The trail leads deeper into the snowfields, toward the ruins. The ruins? The Winter Cathedral, Kale said grimly. A place where ancient rituals were once performed, where the boundary between worlds grows thin. He paused. If they have taken your mother there, it is because they intend to use that power. Ella's grip on his cloak tightened. The snow grew harsher. The wind shrieked louder. And beneath it all, Kale heard something else. Whispers, soft and sibilant, carried on the storm like prayers spoken backward. He stopped abruptly. Kale. Ella looked up at him, her eyes wide. Something's wrong, he murmured. The whispers grew louder. The air shimmered, and the temperature plummeted, far colder than even a frostfall blizzard should be. Kale's hand moved to the hilt of his blade, his muscles coiling. Stay behind me, he commanded. Do not move. Do not run. No matter what happens. Ella nodded quickly, stepping closer to him. And then they came. Shapes materialized from the storm, massive, hulking forms that prowled forward on four legs. Wolves. But not living creatures. These were constructs, conjured from blood magic and shadow, their bodies translucent and flickering like smoke. Their eyes burned green, the same sickly light as the sigils in Scarlet's apothecary. Their fangs dripped with ethereal fire. There were 6 of them, maybe more. They circled slowly, their growls reverberating through the air like the rumble of distant thunder. Kale drew his blade, a long, curved sword that gleamed black as obsidian, etched with silver runes that flared to life the moment it left its sheath. Blood mages, he said, his voice low and deadly. They know we're here. The largest wolf lunged. Kale moved. He was impossibly fast, a blur of black and silver. His blade met the wolf mid-leap, slicing through its spectral form with a burst of crimson light. The creature dissolved into smoke with a shriek that split the air. But the others attacked as one. Kale spun, his cloak whipping outward like a living thing, shielding Ella as 2 wolves leapt toward her. His blade carved through the air in a deadly arc, severing one wolf's head from its shoulders. The other snapped at his arm, fangs closing on empty air as Kale twisted aside, driving his blade through its chest. More wolves emerged from the storm, Too many. Kale fought with brutal efficiency, his movements precise and lethal. But for every wolf he destroyed, another took its place, their green eyes blazing, their growls growing louder. One lunged past his guard, aiming for Ella. No!
Kale roared.
He threw himself between them, catching the wolf by its throat with his bare hand. The creature thrashed, its ethereal form burning against his skin, but Kale held firm. His crimson eyes blazed brighter, and his grip tightened, crushing, dissolving, obliterating. The wolf shrieked and vanished, but the effort cost him. Kale's breathing grew ragged. His control wavered, and beneath the surface, something ancient and terrible stirred.
Power. Raw.
Uncontained. Centuries of it, buried deep within him, straining against its chains. Another wolf lunged. Kale raised his blade, but his hand trembled. The sword wavered.
No. Not now.
The wolves sensed weakness. They pressed forward, circling tighter, their growls rising to a fever pitch. Kale's vision blurred. His fangs lengthened involuntarily, sharp and deadly. His eyes burned brighter, no longer crimson but blazing scarlet, glowing like embers in the storm. The air around him crackled with energy. Dark, ancient, hungry. He was losing control. Kale. Ella's voice cut through the chaos like a bell. Kale, please. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see her, tiny and terrified, clutching his cloak with both hands, her eyes wide and filled with tears. Don't leave me, she whispered. Please don't leave me alone. Something in her voice, something fragile and fierce and utterly human, pierced through the storm of power threatening to consume him. Kale exhaled slowly, focused, grounded, and then he let go, not in control, but of restraint. He raised one hand toward the circling wolves, his palm glowing with crimson light. The air shimmered. The ground beneath them cracked. Enough, he said, his voice resonating with power that shook the very storm. Crimson energy exploded outward in a devastating wave, a burst of ancient vampire magic that roared through the snowfields like a tidal surge. The wolves shrieked as the light consumed them, their spectral forms dissolving into ash and smoke. The storm itself recoiled, the wind faltering, the snow hanging suspended in the air for one impossible moment. And then, silence. The wolves were gone. The whispers had ceased. Only the soft hiss of falling snow remained. Kale stood at the center of the clearing, his chest heaving, his hand still outstretched. His eyes burned scarlet. His fangs gleamed in the dim light. He looked more creature than king, more predator than protector. Kale? Ella's voice was small, frightened. He turned slowly and she flinched, just slightly, at the sight of him. For a moment neither moved. Then Ella stepped forward. Slowly, carefully. She reached out and touched his hand, the one still glowing faintly with residual magic. Her fingers were warm.
Soft.
Humans. It's okay, she whispered. You saved me. Kale stared down at her, and something within him shifted. The crimson light faded. His fangs retracted. His breathing slowed. The terrible, ancient thing that had stirred within him settled back into stillness. He lowered his hand. His voice was hoarse. I almost lost control. But you didn't, Ella said firmly. You didn't because I was here. Kale knelt slowly, meeting her gaze. She didn't look afraid anymore. Just determined. Just there. He realized, with a jolt that felt almost like pain, that he had not let anyone this close in centuries, had not allowed anyone to see him vulnerable, had not trusted anyone enough to pull him back from the edge. But this child, this tiny, fragile child, had done exactly that. Thank you, he said quietly. Ella smiled just a little. You're welcome. Kale rose, sheathing his blade. He looked out across the snowfields, and his gaze sharpened. There, barely visible through the storm, were footprints. Not spectral this time, but real. Burned into the snow, glowing faintly with residual magic. They led toward a dark shape on the horizon. A jagged silhouette of broken stone and shattered arches. The Winter Cathedral. Kale placed a hand on Ella's shoulder. "We're close," he said grimly. "Stay with me. Whatever happens next, do not let go." Ella nodded, gripping his cloak tightly. Together, they turned toward the ruins and walked into the heart of the storm. The winter cathedral rose from the snow like the skeleton of a fallen god. Once, it had been magnificent, a towering monument of white stone and stained glass, a place where the ancient winter guard performed their sacred rites. Now it was a ruin. The roof had collapsed centuries ago, leaving only jagged arches clawing at the gray sky. The walls were blackened and cracked, scarred by fire and time. Snow drifted through empty windows, piling in corners where darkness pooled like spilled ink. And everywhere, carved into the stone, burned into the earth, were sigils. Kale stopped at the cathedral's perimeter, his crimson eyes scanning the ground. The sigils formed a vast circle around the ruins, pulsing faintly with sickly green light. Blood magic.
Fresh.
Active. "They're here," he said quietly. "Or they were. Recently." Ella pressed closer to him, her breath misting in the frigid air. "Do you think Mama's inside?" "Yes," Kale said, his voice grim. "But we must be careful. This place is a trap waiting for spring." They moved forward, crossing the threshold of sigils. The moment Kale's boot touched the inner circle, the air shimmered, magic recognizing his presence, testing him. But he pressed on, shielding Ella with his cloak. The cathedral's entrance yawned before them, a gaping archway half buried in snow. Beyond it lay shadows, so thick they seemed tangible. Kale drew his blade. "Stay close." They entered. Inside, the cathedral was colder than the storm outside, an unnatural cold that bit through enchantments and flesh alike. Their breath came in clouds. Frost covered everything, glittering in the faint light that filtered through the broken roof. And then Ella saw it. "Wait." She pulled away from Kale, rushing towards something half buried in the snow near a collapsed pillar. "Ella." Kale moved after her, but she had already dropped to her knees. She brushed snow aside, revealing scattered objects, torn sprigs of dried lavender, broken glass vials, and a small wooden charm carved in the shape of a snowflake. Ella picked up the charm with trembling fingers. "Mama made this," she whispered. "She always wears it." Kale crouched beside her, examining the items. The herbs were fresh, torn recently. The vials still held traces of tinctures, healing salves, protective potions. And the charm, he touched it carefully. Magic hummed beneath his fingers, faint but unmistakable. Winter blood magic. Protective. Loving. "She was here," Kale said quietly. "And she was alive when she dropped this." Ella clutched the charm to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Where is she now?" Kale rose, his gaze sweeping the cathedral. And then he felt it. A resonance. A pulse of magic, so subtle, he almost missed it. It was coming from Ella. He turned sharply, studying her. The air around the child shimmered faintly, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw it. A ghostly echo of power, silver blue and ancient, wrapping around her like invisible threads. "Ella," he said carefully, "do you feel anything? Warmth? A pull?" She blinked, wiping her eyes. I don't know. Maybe? It's like something's calling me." Kale's jaw tightened. Scarlet's magic is resonating through her daughter. "Follow that feeling," he said, carefully. "Tell me where it leads." Ella closed her eyes, clutching the charm. Her small brow furrowed in concentration. Then she pointed toward the back of the cathedral, where darkness pooled thickest. "There," she whispered. "Underneath." Kale moved toward the spot she'd indicated, brushing aside snow and debris. Beneath it, he found a hidden staircase spiraling downward into the earth. The steps were carved from ancient stone, worn smooth by centuries of use. And along the walls, more sigils glowed, brighter here, pulsing with malevolent energy. "The vaults," Kale murmured. "They've taken her below." He descended first, blade drawn, Ella following close behind. The air grew colder with every step, and the whispers returned, soft, insidious, speaking in tongues Kale had not heard in millennia. Obsidian Lord, awaken. Blood and ice. The gate opens. Kale's blood ran cold. No, he breathed. They wouldn't dare. What is it? Ella asked, her voice trembling. The Obsidian Lord, Kale said grimly. An ancient enemy. Older than Frostfall, older than the vampire clans. He was sealed beneath this cathedral centuries ago by the Winter Guard.
He paused.
If they're using your mother's winterblood magic as a conduit, they want to bring him back, Ella finished, horror dawning in her eyes. Yes. They reached the bottom of the stairs. Before them stretched a vast underground chamber, its ceiling supported by crumbling pillars. And at its center, surrounded by a ring of glowing sigils, was a stone altar. Empty. But signs of recent use were everywhere. Burned candles, spilled blood, chains hanging from the altar's sides. She was here, Kale said, his voice tight. But they've moved her.
Kale.
The voice came from behind them. Kale spun, blade raised, but Ella had already run forward. Mama. Scarlet Morgan stood at the entrance to a side chamber, her golden hair disheveled, her apothecary dress torn and stained. She looked exhausted, frightened, but alive. Ella, baby, Scarlet called, her voice breaking. Come here. Quickly. No. Kale's command rang out like a whip crack. Ella froze, confused. But it's Mama. It's not, Kale said coldly, his eyes fixed on the figure. Look at her shadow. Ella looked down and gasped. Scarlet's shadow stretched across the floor, but it moved independently, writhing like smoke. And her eyes, when the light caught them, glowed faintly green. An illusion, Kale growled. A phantom conjured to deceive us. The false Scarlet's expression twisted into something cruel. Clever, Vampire King. But the child almost believed. Kale moved faster than sight, his blade slicing through the phantom. It shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and dissolved into smoke. Ella stumbled back, trembling. Kale caught her, pulling her close. They're playing games, he said quietly. Testing us.
Why?
To buy time. A slow clap echoed through the chamber. Kale turned, his entire body tensing. Lord Varen stepped from the shadows, no longer wearing the robes of the High Council. Now he was clad in dark leather inscribed with blood magic sigils, his eyes glowing the same sickly green as the phantoms. Behind him, figures emerged, blood mages, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their hands crackling with dark energy. My lord, Varen said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. How good of you to deliver the child, personally. Kale's eyes blazed. Traitor. Varen smiled. Pragmatist. Your sentimentality has made you weak, Kale. The Obsidian Lord offers true power, not the stagnant rule of a dying king. Kale's blade rose, crimson magic flaring along its edge. Where is Scarlet Morgan? Varen's smile widened. Where she belongs. Completing the ritual that will reshape Frostfall. And the blood mages attacked. The blood mages surged forward like a dark tide. Kale met them with fury incarnate. His blade carved through the first mage before the creature could complete its incantation, dissolving the conjured magic in a burst of crimson light. He spun, his cloak whipping outward, deflecting bolts of green fire that scorched the air where he'd stood moments before. Ella, run, he roared. Hide. Ella didn't hesitate. She scrambled behind a fallen pillar, clutching her mother's charm, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Varen watched from the shadows, his expression calm, almost bored. He raised one hand, and 3 figures stepped forward, vampires, their eyes glowing crimson, their fangs bared. Not blood mages. Court members. Kale's blade froze mid-strike.
No.
The vampires attacked in unison, moving with the precision of warriors who had fought beside Kale for centuries. They knew his patterns, his weaknesses, his tells. And they used that knowledge against him. One lunged from the left, forcing Kale to pivot. Another struck from the right, fangs aimed for his throat. The third circled behind, moving toward Ella's hiding place.
Kale saw it.
I felt it. The trap closed around him. Not her. Anyone but her. He abandoned defense entirely. His blade flashed, catching the first vampire across the chest. The creature shrieked, staggering back, but didn't fall. Kale turned, his hand shooting out to catch the second vampire by the throat. He squeezed, crushing, relentless, until the traitor went limp. But the third had reached Ella. The vampire hauled her from behind the pillar, one clawed hand wrapped around her arm. Ella screamed, kicking, struggling, but the vampire's grip was iron. No! Kale's voice was a thunderclap. He moved, faster than thought, faster than fear, and his blade drove through the vampire's back, erupting from its chest in a spray of black blood. The creature dissolved to ash, and Kale caught Ella as she fell forward. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely. "I've got you." Ella clung to him, sobbing. "They tried to take me. I know. I know." Varen stepped forward, clapping slowly. Impressive, but futile. Kale turned, his crimson eyes blazing, Ella still pressed against his side. "Why?" Varen tilted his head. "Why betray you?" "Because you've grown soft, Kale. Centuries of rule have dulled your edge. You care about mortals now. About a child." He sneered. The council saw it. "Some of us simply chose to act." "The council," Kale repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "How many?" "Enough." Varen gestured, and more figures emerged from the shadows. Vampires, all bearing the sigils of Blackspire Court. "We have a new vision for Frostfall. One where vampires do not bow to sentiment, where power is wielded without mercy." "And the child?" Kale asked. Varen's smile widened. "Leverage. Surrender her to the blood mages, and Scarlet's magic becomes permanently bound. The ritual completes. The Obsidian Lord rises, and we, the true lords of Frostfall, claim our rightful place at his side." Silence. Then Kale laughed, a cold, bitter sound that echoed through the chamber. "You're fool, Varen. The Obsidian Lord does not share power. He devours it. You would trade a kingdom for chains. Better chains of strength than the weakness you've shown," Varen spat.
"Now."
"Give us the child, or we will take her." Kale's grip on his blade tightened. He could feel Ella's heartbeat against his side. Rapid, terrified, but steady.
"Alive."
He thought of centuries of rule, of alliances forged and broken, of power maintained through calculated cruelty. And then he thought of a tiny girl collapsing in the snow, whispering, "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." His decision was instant.
"No."
Varen's expression darkened. "Then you choose death." "I choose her." Kale pushed Ella behind him, his body a shield, and raised his blade. Crimson magic flared along its edge, brighter than before, fed by something deeper than mere power. Conviction. The traitor vampires attacked as one. Kale unleashed hell. His blade moved like lightning, carving through their ranks with brutal efficiency. He didn't hold back, didn't hesitate. Every strike was lethal, every movement calculated to destroy. One vampire lunged, Kale drove his blade through its heart. Another conjured dark magic. Kale shattered it with a burst of crimson fire and tore the creature's head from its shoulders. Varen joined the fray, his own blade crackling with blood magic. He was fast, faster than Kale expected, and their swords clashed with a sound like thunder. "You've already lost," Varen snarled. "The ritual is nearly complete." "Then I'll stop it," Kale growled. "After I end you." Their blades locked. Varen's eyes blazed green. "You cannot kill us all. Watch me." Kale twisted, breaking the deadlock, and drove his fist into Varen's chest. Not with a blade, with raw magic. Crimson light exploded outward. Varen screamed, a sound of agony and fury, as the magic consumed him from within. His body convulsed, cracks of light spreading across his skin like shattered glass. And then he disintegrated. Ash and smoke where a traitor once stood. The remaining vampires froze, their eyes wide with shock. Kale turned to face them, his blade dripping with black blood, his eyes burning like embers in the dark. "Anyone else?" he asked quietly. Silence. Then, one by one, the traitors fled, vanishing into the shadows, their courage shattered. But others emerged, loyal vampires, led by Lady Alara, who had been held captive in the upper chambers. They knelt before Kale, their heads bowed. "My lord," Alara said, her voice steady, "forgive us. We did not know the depth of Varen's treachery until it was too late." Kale lowered his blade slowly.
Rise.
"There is no time for apologies. Scarlet Morgan is still in danger." Alara stood. "What do you need?" "Gather every loyal vampire. Arm them. We march on the cathedral vaults."
Now.
"Yes, my lord." The vampires dispersed, moving with swift purpose. Kale turned back to Ella, who had emerged from behind the pillar. She was trembling, tears streaking her face, but she ran to him without hesitation. He knelt, catching her as she threw her arms around his neck. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly, holding her close. "But I promised you, I will never let them take you." She pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. "What about Mama?" Kale's expression hardened with resolve. He stood, lifting Ella into his arms. "If Scarlet lives, I will find her." He turned toward the cathedral vaults, where darkness waited and destiny beckoned. "If she falls, I will fall with her." And with Ella held close and his loyal court at his back, the Vampire King descended into the final battle. The deepest vault was a cathedral within a cathedral. Ancient pillars rose from the darkness, carved with runes that predated the vampire clans, predated even the Winter Guard. The air thrummed with power so thick it was nearly visible, waves of magic pulsing outward from the chamber's center like a malignant heartbeat. And there, suspended above a yawning chasm, was Scarlet Morgan. She hung in midair, her arms spread wide, her body wrapped in chains of glowing green light. Blood mages surrounded her in a circle, their chanting rising and falling in a rhythm that made Kale's teeth ache. Beneath her, the ground had split open, a rift into darkness, so complete it seemed to devour the very concept of light. Something moved within that darkness. Something vast and ancient and hungry. The Obsidian Lord. Kale's blade blazed crimson as he stepped into the chamber, Ella clutched against his side. His loyal vampires fanned out behind him, weapons drawn. "Scarlet!" Ella's cry echoed through the vault. Scarlet's eyes snapped open, golden and filled with terror. "Ella?"
No.
"Run!" The blood mages turned as one, their chanting faltering. The lead mage, a gaunt figure whose face was hidden beneath a bone-white mask, raised one skeletal hand. "The Vampire King," the mage hissed. "And the child. How convenient. Seize them." The blood mages attacked. But Kale was already moving. His blade met the first mage in a shower of sparks, crimson magic clashing against sickly green. He pivoted, his free hand unleashing a wave of power that sent two more mages sprawling. His loyal vampires engaged the others, fangs and steel flashing in the darkness. But the ritual continued. The lead mage resumed chanting, his voice rising above the chaos, and the rift beneath Scarlet widened, tendrils of shadow reaching upward, wrapping around her legs. "Kale!" Scarlet screamed. "It's pulling me in." Kale fought his way toward her, cutting through mages with brutal efficiency. But for everyone he felled, the ritual grew stronger. The chains of light tightened. Scarlet's body convulsed, her magic being ripped from her in glowing streams that poured into the rift. "Mama!" Ella broke free from Kale's side, running toward her mother. "Ella, no!" But Ella didn't stop. She ran straight toward the circle of mages, her small hands clutching her mother's charm. And the moment she crossed the boundary of the ritual circle, everything changed. The chanting stuttered. The green light flickered. The tendrils of shadow recoiled as if burned. Ella's presence, her winterblood magic, dormant but pure, disrupted the ritual. "Impossible!" the lead mage shrieked. "The child." Kale didn't give him time to finish. He crossed the distance in a heartbeat, his blade driving through the mage's chest. The creature dissolved with a wail that shook the chamber. But the damage was done. The ritual, though weakened, was too far along. The rift had opened too wide. And Scarlet was still being drained, her life force feeding the darkness below. Kale looked up at her. This woman who had saved him once, asking nothing in return. This woman whose daughter had reminded him what it meant to care. He looked at the sigils surrounding her, pulsing with ancient power. And he understood. Blood for blood. Power for power. Life for life. The ritual could only be broken by an offering equal to what it sought to take. No, Scarlet gasped, reading his expression. Kale, don't. Protect Ella, he said quietly. And then he stepped forward, into the center of the ritual circle. The remaining blood mages lunged at him, but his vampires held them back, forming a protective wall. Kale stood beneath Scarlet, his hand reaching toward the largest sigil, a burning mark carved into the stone floor, pulsing with the heart of the ritual's power. He knew what it would cost. Vampires did not give up their essence lightly. It was their immortality, their strength, the very core of what made them eternal. To surrender even a fragment meant vulnerability, mortality,
Pain.
but Ella's voice echoed in his mind. You saved me. And Scarlet's. I'll be home before you wake. Promises mattered. Lives mattered. They mattered. Kale pressed his hand against the burning sigil. Agony exploded through him, white-hot and absolute. It felt as though his very soul was being torn apart, piece by piece, fed into the ritual to counter its dark hunger. He felt his immortal essence leaving him, flowing into the sigil, unraveling centuries of power. He screamed, a sound of raw anguish that shook the vault. The sigil blazed brighter, crimson light clashing against green. The chains binding Scarlet shattered. The rift beneath her convulsed, its edges collapsing inward as the ritual fought against Kale's sacrifice. Kale. Scarlet's voice was desperate. End it, he gasped. Use your magic. End it now. Scarlet's eyes blazed silver blue. Her winter blood magic, dormant for so long, surged to life. She raised her hands, and ice erupted from her palms. Not the cold of winter, but the cold of absolute zero, ancient and unstoppable. The ice struck the rift like a spear, piercing its heart. The darkness screamed, a sound that was not sound but something deeper, something that resonated in the bones and soul. And then the ritual shattered. Energy exploded outward in a cataclysmic wave. Stone cracked. Pillars crumbled. The blood mages were obliterated, their bodies dissolving into ash. The rift collapsed with a deafening roar, sealing itself as if it had never existed. Silence. Kale collapsed to his knees, his hand still pressed against the now dark sigil. His vision blurred. His body trembled. He felt mortal, fragile in a way he had not experienced in millennia. And then Scarlet was falling. He caught her, barely, his weakened arms wrapping around her as she tumbled from where she'd been suspended. They collapsed together onto the cold stone floor, her body limp against his. Scarlet, he whispered hoarsely. Can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open, golden and clear and alive. Kale, you? I'm fine, he lied. She smiled weakly. Terrible liar. Mama. Ella ran to them, throwing her arms around both of them, sobbing. Scarlet pulled her daughter close, kissing her hair, her tears falling freely. I'm here, baby, Scarlet whispered. I'm here. Kale held them both, his head bowed, his breath ragged. Around them, his loyal vampires secured the chamber, ensuring no threats remained. Above, through the shattered ceiling of the vault, the storm that had raged for days began to break. Pale light, real sunlight, pierced the clouds for the first time in what felt like forever. Ella looked up at Kale, her small hand resting on his. You saved her. Kale met her gaze, and for the first time in centuries, he smiled. A genuine, weary, human smile. We saved each other. Kale woke to warmth. Not the oppressive heat of battle or the burning agony of sacrifice, but something gentler. The soft crackle of a hearth. The weight of a thick blanket. The distant murmur of voices. He opened his eyes slowly, his vision swimming before focusing on the familiar vaulted ceiling of his private chambers. Golden light flickered across the stone from the fireplace. The scent of cedar and something sweeter, herbal tea, filled the air. and sitting beside his bed, watching him with worried eyes, were Scarlet and Ella. "You're awake," Scarlet said softly, relief flooding her voice. Ella leaned forward, her small hand reaching for his. "You've been asleep for 2 whole days." 2 days, Cale murmured, his voice rough. He tried to sit up, but his body protested. Weak, trembling, mortal in a way that felt foreign and terrifying. Scarlet placed a gentle hand on his shoulder.
Easy.
"You gave up part of your essence. Your body needs time to heal." Cale looked at her, really looked at her. Her golden hair was clean and braided now, her face no longer pale with exhaustion. She wore simple clothes, a borrowed dress from the manor, but her eyes held a clarity and strength that reminded him of the woman who had tended his wounds years ago. "You're well," he said quietly. "Thanks to you." Scarlet's eyes glistened. "I remember fragments. The ritual, the pain, and then you, fighting through blood mages, giving up your power to save me." Her voice cracked.
Why?
Cale met her gaze. "Because it was the right thing to do." "That's what he always says," Ella chimed in, squeezing his hand. "But I know the real reason. It's because he cares about us." Cale's chest tightened, not with pain, but with something else. Something warm and unfamiliar and utterly overwhelming. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I do." Ella beamed, then climbed onto the bed beside him, nestling against his side as if she'd done it 100 times before. "I'm not leaving."
Ever.
"You saved Mama and you saved me, and now we're staying with you." Scarlet smiled, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Ella, Lord Cale, might want a space." "No," Cale interrupted. He looked at Ella, then at Scarlet. "She's right. You both belong here. If you'll have it." Scarlet's eyes widened. "Cale, we couldn't possibly." "You can. You will." His voice was firm despite his weakness. Frostfall is not safe yet. The blood mages are scattered, but not destroyed. And your winter blood magic, he looked at Scarlet. It makes you a target. Both of you need protection. And you need us, Ella said matter-of-factly. Because you're weaker now, right? Cale's lips quivered into a faint smile. Perceptive child. "I'm very smart," Ella declared proudly. Scarlet laughed, a soft, genuine sound that seemed to fill the room with light.
"She is.
Too smart for her own good sometimes." Cale looked between them, and something in his ancient heart shifted irreversibly. For centuries, he had ruled alone, surrounded by power and politics and endless, cold immortality. But now he had something worth protecting, something worth living for. "I make you this vow," he said quietly, his crimson eyes holding Scarlet's. "I will protect you, both of you, with everything I have, for as long as I draw breath." Scarlet's breath caught. "Cale, I mean it." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for doubt or obligation. But all she found was sincerity, raw and unguarded. "Then I accept," she said softly. "And I offer you this in return. My knowledge, my magic, my gratitude." And she hesitated, then reached out, placing her hand over his. "My friendship, if you'll have it." Cale looked down at her hand, warm, human, alive, covering his own. "I will," he said. 3 days later, the High Council convened once more. But this time, the chamber felt different. The air was lighter, the tension less oppressive. The surviving loyal vampires had gathered, and word of Cale's sacrifice had spread throughout Blackspire Manor. Lady Alara stood before the council table, addressing those assembled. "Lord Cale gave up a fragment of his immortal essence to save a mortal woman," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. "He chose compassion over power, sacrifice over self-preservation." She paused, her amber eyes sweeping across the council. "And in doing so, he proved himself worthy of our loyalty, not through fear, but through honor." One by one, the council members rose, placing their hands over their hearts in a gesture of fealty. "We serve the Vampire King," they said in unison. "Now and always." In the doorway, partially hidden in shadow, Cale watched. He was still weak, his power diminished, but his presence commanded respect nonetheless. Beside him stood Scarlet and Ella. The child held his hand on one side, her mother on the other. "They respect you," Scarlet murmured. "They respect the sacrifice," Kale corrected quietly. "But respect earned through honor is stronger than respect earned through fear." "You're learning," Scarlet said with a small smile. Kale glanced at her. "I have good teachers." That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the first stars emerged, Kale stood with Scarlet and Ella on the grand steps of Blackspire Manor. The storm had finally, truly broken. The sky was clear and vast, painted in shades of deep purple and gold. And snow was falling, not the violent blizzard that had raged for days, but soft, gentle flakes that drifted down like whispered promises. Ella laughed, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched, trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue. Scarlet watched her daughter with a smile that spoke of relief and joy and hard-won peace. Kale stood beside Scarlet, his cloak draped around his shoulders, his silver hair gleaming in the fading light. He looked different now, not diminished, but softer. More human, perhaps. Or simply more alive. "Thank you," Scarlet said quietly, her gaze still on Ella. "For everything. For saving her. For saving me. For—" She turned to look at him. "For caring." Kale met her eyes. "I should be thanking you." "For what?" "For reminding me what it means to be more than a king." He paused. "To be myself." Scarlet's expression softened. She reached out, her fingers brushing his, tentative, questioning.
He didn't pull away.
"I think," she said gently, "this is just the beginning." Kale looked at her, then at Ella, who had run back to them and was now tugging on both their hands, trying to pull them into her snow dance. "Come on," Ella insisted. "Both of you." Scarlet laughed, letting herself be pulled forward. And after a moment's hesitation, so did Kale. The three of them stood together on the steps of Blackspire Manor, surrounded by falling snow that glittered like starlight. A vampire king who had learned to love, a woman who had survived the darkness, and a child who had brought them together. Above them, the white skies of Frostfall stretched endless and beautiful. And somewhere in the weaving of fate, destiny smiled, because this story, this bond forged in storm and shadow, was only just beginning.